the perianal abscess. It's a condition that, well, patients often avoid talking about because of some pretty intense stigma.
Absolutely. And clinically, it needs immediate evidence-based management. Thousands of people are affected every year. So
This isn't some rare condition. We're talking between 14,000 and 20,000 people in the UK alone every year.
it's a common problem that demands a high-quality, zero-delay approach.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start where the patient often starts, with shame. This is the issue that keeps them from seeking help early, isn't it?
It really is.
They come in feeling this deep guilt, convinced their condition is from poor hygiene or some kind of personal neglect. What does the medical literature actually say about where these come from?
This is the first thing we have to reject. That hygiene myth. It has absolutely no place in a clinical interaction.
So it's not true.
Not at all. The data offers a definitive biological answer. The origin is almost entirely anatomical. We know that the vast majority, we're talking about 90% of these abscesses, they don't start on the skin.
Right.
They happen because of a blockage and then an infection in what are called the cryptoglandular glands.
Okay, so for those of us who might be a little rusty on our general surgery anatomy, paint a quick picture. Where are these glands?
They're tiny ducts located just inside the anal canal. Their job is lubrication, but, being tiny tubes, they can get blocked. And when a duct gets blocked, and this is just by random chance, really, the material backs up.
So the source is internal, it's deep, it's not a surface-level problem?
Precisely. The gland gets blocked, gut flora infects the contents, and that collection of pus becomes an abscess. The takeaway is this. It happens by chance. There is zero evidence linking it to personal hygiene or diet or a sedentary lifestyle.
That one fact reframes the entire patient encounter, doesn't it?
It has to.
It changes the conversation from one of blame to one of clear medical pathology. We have to actively remove that guilt so patients come in sooner.
That's the first step in compassionate care and a critical step for better outcomes.
Yeah.
Now, if we move from etiology, let's talk about clinical stratification.
Okay, so once the patient is in front of you, what's next? Beyond the obvious local pain and swelling, is there a simple systemic sign we can look for? A red flag for a more complicated case?
Yes, and this is where recent research is so helpful. You need to look at systemic markers. A documented fever is the key prognostic predictor.
A fever.
Specifically, a patient presenting with a temperature over 38 degrees Celsius, they're significantly more likely to have a recurrence or to develop a fistula down the line.
And is that 38-degree threshold a hard line? I mean, is there a strong statistical correlation?
Oh, absolutely. The data is very clear. Crossing that line correlates with a much, much higher complication rate. The recurrence for a febrile patient can jump from the standard, say, 20% to almost 45%.
45%, that is a massive jump.
It is. A fever isn't just a sign of infection in general. It's a marker of deep, complex, systemic disease.
So that finding suggests the abscess we see on the surface might just be the tip of the iceberg. The fever is telling us the disease has tracked deeper.
Exactly. It implies a more diffuse infection. For clinicians, this is actionable information. It should directly impact your surgical planning.
How does it change the workflow then? A junior provider sees a patient, confirmed abscess, temp is 38.2. What should they do differently?
The management should change. That patient is now high risk, and they benefit immensely from input from an experienced senior surgeon.
So does that mean waiting for the senior surgeon to actually do the case? Because, that could mean a delay for a patient in a lot of pain.
And that's the core dilemma, isn't it? Relieving the pain is paramount. But if that fever is present, the senior team needs to be notified immediately, because that recurrence risk has doubled. Waiting a bit for senior assessment to prevent a 45% recurrence rate is almost always the right call.
Okay, so we've stratified the risk. Now let's get to the core of the treatment itself. A lot of people, patients, and maybe some providers, they're still hoping for a non-surgical fix. Can antibiotics alone resolve a perianal abscess?
The data on this is non-negotiable. Antibiotics are not curative. The primary essential treatment is surgical incision and immediate drainage.
There's no way around it.
No. An abscess is a walled-off collection of pus. Antibiotics can't really get in there effectively, so relying on them just delays the inevitable and lets the infection grow.
What about using them after a successful drainage? Does that help prevent a future fistula? That's the complication everyone worries about.
Yeah, it's a common practice, but unfortunately, the evidence doesn't support it for otherwise healthy patients. Studies show that even after a good drainage, a course of antibiotics offers no statistically significant protection against fistula formation.
So we should really be reinforcing the danger of any delay.
We must. Relying on antibiotics and delaying drainage is dangerous. It gives the infection time to track, to become more complex, and to potentially make the patient septic. The clock is always ticking.
Let's pivot to after the procedure. Post-operative pain is a huge deal for these patients. For decades, packing the wound with gauze was standard. The theory was it helped the wound heal from the bottom up. Is that painful practice still evidence-based?
It's a tradition that's now being strongly challenged by modern evidence. The theory, it made some sense, but the patient experience and the actual outcomes just don't justify it.
What does the data show?
The studies are pretty overwhelming. Routine packing is linked to significantly more patient suffering, and it doesn't actually improve healing or lower recurrence rates. We're putting patients through agony for no good reason.
How much more painful are we talking?
The pain differential is really stark. Studies show that the dressing changes with packing are linked to a twofold, even a threefold, increase in patient-reported pain scores.
2 to 3 times more pain? That's huge.
It's huge. And then you add the cost, the inconvenience, the need for district nurses. It's a massive burden.
So if we skip the packing, what's the recommended management now? How do we handle that cavity?
The consensus is to let it heal by secondary intention. You get the same result, just with a dramatic reduction in pain. Management usually involves simple, non-adherent dressings and encouraging sitz baths or shower irrigation a few times a day to keep it clean.
That seems like such a clear win. Better for the patient, simpler for the system.
It is. Clinicians should feel very confident making this change.
Okay, let's talk about the reality of who's doing these procedures. Given how common and urgent they are, who is typically performing the drainage?
It's overwhelmingly a trainee procedure. That's just the reality of acute general surgery. One review showed that 96% of these were done by surgical trainees.
96%.
And often after hours, when senior supervision might be stretched a bit thin.
That's an incredible number. So the critical question is it safe? Are the outcomes just as good?
Yes. The good news is that the safety profile holds up. The data confirms that recurrence rates for standard procedures done by supervised trainees are comparable to international standards. For a healthy patient with a straightforward abscess, the care is safe.
That's reassuring. But you mentioned earlier some complex cases need senior input. Can you just recap those red flag scenarios for us?
Of course. Standard drainage is fine for standard cases, but complex pathology needs senior expertise, so you're looking for underlying comorbidities.
Like what?
Specifically inflammatory bowel disease, especially Crohn's. Those patients have a much higher chance of a complicated fistula. Also, patients with uncontrolled diabetes. They're at a much higher risk of a rapidly spreading, even lethal soft tissue infection, like necrotizing fasciitis.
So for those patients, the senior surgeon's role is much bigger than just draining pus?
Exactly. It's about planning for what's underneath, making sure the exploration is meticulous, and monitoring them closely for those life-threatening complications.
We've covered 5 major actionable updates today. Can you synthesize this evidence for us one last time?
Of course. The latest literature really demands a more compassionate, evidence-based approach. We start by debunking the hygiene myth. We stratify risk by recognizing a temp over 38 is a major red flag. We stick to the evidence that drainage is mandatory and antibiotics are not a substitute. And critically, we have to abandon the painful, outdated tradition of routine packing.
We have clarified the science. We've provided the updates for you to refine your practice. But the final message, the simplest advice for patients, is really about prognosis and safety.
And that advice is simply that the most dangerous thing a patient can do is wait.
Any delay increases the risk of the infection tracking deeper, it increases the risk of sepsis, and it leads to greater morbidity. If you suspect an abscess, immediate help must be sought. Early intervention is the absolute key to relief.
That promptness dictates everything. It's the difference between a simple outpatient procedure and a complex hospital stay that might need more surgery down the line. The prognosis really does rest on how quickly the patient presents.
We'll catch you next time for the next evidence update.